Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed visiting the expo area and also that you had an awesome time in networking. We are now back with an interesting expert talk and a thought-provoking topic. As you know, prior to the pandemic, we kind of figured out how to manage face-to-face workers more or less. But then a great majority of companies went online and many organizations just had to learn in time how to manage this workforce, even though we have had virtual workplaces for decades. So how to manage all of this is an essential question. Today, I am honored to introduce you to our expert in this session, Mr. Leslie Szamosi. And Professor Szamosi is the director of the dual degree Pan-European MBA program at City College at University of York, Europe campus. Our host, who will lead the session today, is Masa Vlahovic. Masa is a marketing assistant at HR World. So, Professor Szamosi and Masha, welcome. Good luck with your session, and let's hear more about this new reality for the workforce.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Leslie. Hi, Alexander.
Hi, Masa. Good to
so
see
much
you.
For a nice introduction. I gotta say, it's a great privilege to be hosting an expert talk with my ex-professor, I could say. It's a great honor that I'm an alumni from the university where he works, and I think this is a very interesting talk. So if you want to hear more, please do stay with us. So as an expert, I have 5 questions that I want to ask. And the first one is, we all know the 5 key dependent variables. So productivity, satisfaction, absenteeism, turnover, and loyalty. What do you think was the effect of the COVID pandemic-induced remote work? How do you think that we managed to actually affect the 5 variables? And what do you think was the effect of it?
Thank you very much, Masa, and thank you for the kind introduction as well. It's really interesting, this movement to forced remote work. People have been talking about wanting to go remote for the longest time. And if you think about it, prior to March 1st, 2020, if you asked organizations, how do you feel about putting people into remote work, telework, telecommuting, call it whatever it is? The majority of organizations were saying, no, it doesn't work. We don't trust our employees. People are going to go home. They're going to sit. They're going to do nothing, and we're going to have problems. And then by March 20th, March 30th, 2020, we were basically shoveling people out the door, sending them home. And of course, the big question was, what's going to happen? So if you look at the different 5 dependent variables, basically the 5 things that we as HR experts can impact inside organizations, from job satisfaction to turnover, to loyalty, to productivity, to absenteeism. What was interesting was the variable that was impacted most to begin with was productivity. All the data that we have suggests that productivity went up when the pandemic struck, and we were putting people started working at home. And the big question, of course, is why? Okay? Does it mean that they weren't giving us so much in the office that they had stuff to give? And actually what happened was, it's interesting, we impacted the variable called trust, and as well this thing called loyalty inside organizations. There was this initial bounce that happened in terms of productivity. Basically, productivity went up. So there was a lot of positiveness initially when we got into remote working. What's interesting is over the last 5 to 6 months, we've actually seen a productivity decrease in terms of remote working. Now, some people are saying that this is because of overall tiredness with remote working, that we've sort of had enough of it. But what our research has shown, and what we found from talking with employees, is that organizations started putting more rules and restrictions on remote workers. For example, when people initially went remote, there was a lot of freedom and flexibility in terms of getting things done. And people, as long as they got their work done, we basically left them alone. Then we started saying, well, actually, you know what? You have to be at your computer between this hour and this hour, okay? Which basically said, we're not trusting you as much as we used to. And productivity begins to decrease. The other dependent variables, turnover. Okay, turnover through this pandemic has decreased. Now, there's a real logical explanation, which is it would be very difficult to be trying to transition yourself from one organization to another organization or into another organization during a pandemic time. It's a crisis. We've gone through it and so on. But what we're now seeing is, and the latest data, I read this data 3 days ago, something like 45% of employees are ready to leave organizations now. So we went from a very low turnover level to a potential turnover level, which should actually scare a lot of organizations and scare a lot of HR people. On top of that, and the question is why, okay? The loyalty area, the area of loyalty has now decreased. On top of this, what we've seen is organizations have not necessarily kept up with the new views of remote workers towards work. Our research has shown, and we've seen this as well in practice and some of the consulting that we're doing, that approximately 30% of workers who are remote today say, I want back into the organization. Okay, I want back. I've had it with the family. I've had it with my significant others. The children are driving me crazy. I need to get back to being with like-minded individuals. About 30% have said, I want to stay at home. Okay, I want to be at home. I found my sweet spot. This telework, telecommuting, remote work works for me, and I want it. And about 40% have said, I want a combination of the two. I want what we would call hybrid working. I want to be able to come to the office sometimes, and there are other times when I want to stay at home and work, which is arguably the worst case scenario for an organization, having to bridge between these two sides. So what do we see in terms of these dependent variables? We're seeing turnover, potential turnover, ready to go through the roof. We're seeing levels of job satisfaction now being dictated by, is the organization giving me the type of work environment that I want? All at the office, all at home, or hybrid? And what people are saying is, if I don't get what I'm looking for, I'm ready to turn over from what's happening. Absenteeism is an interesting one because basically when people are working at home, there is no such thing as absenteeism. People still somehow, even if they're sick, crawl onto their computer, grab their mobile phone, and are still connecting into the system. So in terms of the dependent variables, turnover ready to explode, loyalty beginning to decrease, job satisfaction now being dependent on what type of work environment the organization is going to provide for me, and productivity waiting to either go up or down depending on what the organization is going to provide for me going forward. It's basically a brave new world in terms of human resource management for organizations.
Exactly. So what do you think will be the eventual impact of remote workers on corporate cultures? Since we know that corporate cultures and the biggest, let's say, aspects of it are values, beliefs, and traditions, how can that be disseminated to remote workers? I guess it's a very big challenge.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. I was doing some work with a company up in Lviv, just out in Ukraine. And they had brought on 4,000 new workers specifically during the pandemic, okay, which is a huge number. They were around 10,000 people. They were up to 14,000. And not one of those workers had ever set foot into their buildings. In fact, a lot of them probably didn't even know where the building was. They had been remote recruited. They had been remote selected. And they were somehow supposed to represent the organizational culture to clients, never actually having that touchy-feely aspect of things, because culture is one of these things where we experience culture. You can't read about culture. It's something that you see and you feel. So right now, what a lot of organizations are doing is trying to do this, what we would call remote mentoring, okay? Remote onboarding, which works to a certain extent, but it really doesn't give, at least in my view, a worker a true sense of the culture of the organization. Now, what are some of the ways that we can do that? Well, one of the ways is, basically we learn through observation and hearing things. So one of the ways to do that, for example, if you have new staff coming on board, is to allow them to see what's happening in virtual meetings. So to be there, but not to actually participate. So they get a sense of what's happening. To give them the opportunity to get used to for example, the language that we speak in an organization. You cannot teach somebody the language, what's appropriate and not appropriate, how we deal with customers, how we deal with internal customers, employees inside the organization. So I think there's a lot of different new techniques that can be used in terms of onboarding, where we could keep people remote. Masa, we talk now about digital nomads, right? People could do their work from anywhere in the world. So if I decide that I'm going to work for a Serbian company and they allow me to work remotely, and I decide that the Bahamas are the best place for me, okay, for whatever reason, how do you onboard somebody so that when they're involved in the system, that they are as if they were in Serbia and as if they're holding on to those particular values, cultural norms, beliefs, whatever it is in terms of organizations? You can go even one step further, which is a multinational with a subsidiary, in Serbia or Montenegro, and the worker being in Brazil. The weird connection. So the German company to a Serbian headquarters, and I work for the Serbian headquarters, except I'm in Brazil. These are the types of things that we're now spending a lot of time trying to figure out, because there are no simple answers for it. Telework, telecommuting, virtual work, we already had answers. Okay, we had been playing with this for the last 30 years, not to the extent that were today, but it's always been there. These types of things are really presenting some big challenges for the HR community.
Exactly. So now that we know that we need to actually adapt our HR practices and corporate cultures in order to fit the remote workers into our cultures and into the way of working, what do you think will be the, let's say, key steps for your clients to take on when approaching remote workers and managing them?
I think the first step is to get our own house in order first. Okay. As I mentioned, are we going face to face? Are we going hybrid? Or are we going remote? So the first thing we have to determine is, for each position inside the organization, what are we going to allow to happen? Okay. For example, there are some positions where perhaps there's just no option. Somebody has to be face to face inside the office. Is there a way of redesigning the workspace so that we can create hybrid working opportunities? So I think the first area that we have to play in is what I would call the organizational structural area, looking at job descriptions, looking at some of the, if you will, human resource 101 in terms of how we deal with workers, how we coordinate with workers and so on, and really take that rethink. Then I think the next step is to go out and find the correct worker for that type of environment. And I think what we're going to be doing, unfortunately, is we're going to be losing some people that used to work or could have worked with us, for example, in a face-to-face work environment very effectively. Because that individual is now saying, I want hybrid, or I want pure remote work. So there's going to be a shakeup in terms of the types of workers that we're going to be attracting. And unfortunately, some of the workers that are going to be leaving us as well, depending on those new structures and so on. One area that I do a lot of research and a lot of consulting in is in the area of organizational change. And we are going to be going through, and we are going through right now, some really fundamental changes in the way organizations are going to be structured as they seek to attract new workers. And I think the other thing we have to remember here is we might start attracting workers into our organizations from places that we may never have considered before. I'll take an example. There might be a Nepalese worker who is the perfect fit for us that will never set foot into our organization, but they're going to give us all of the great things that we want related to our corporate culture and our work environment and so on. So I think a lot of it starts with the construction of who we are and where we want to go. I'm doing some work right now with a really large healthcare company. And they are going through a program that they call Fit to Restart is the terminology they're using. And basically what they're trying to do is break down their organizational structures and say, if we were going to start today, we'll start with a blank sheet. Okay? If we were going to start our company today, we'll start with a blank sheet. And how would we build if we were starting today? It's basically almost like what we would consider to be called a re-engineering of the structures and the systems that we have in order to be fit to restart into what will become the post-pandemic world. Unfortunately, I don't think we're in the post-pandemic organizational systems yet. With the things that are happening with the different variants and all of the different things that are happening today, I still think we're probably about a year to year and a half out. And I've got to say, I tend to be a pessimist in these types of things. But if we think on the worst case scenario, it's 8 months to a year out before we can say we're back to some level of normality, that gives us a very unique window to go through and change what we're doing now, restructure our things, rethink the way we're doing things, and get ready for this restart area.
Exactly. So taking this into consideration, what do you think will happen to companies that have resistance to change, that have like visible resistance to change? Do they go out of business? What happens to people?
All right, I'm going to give you a very quick 3-word answer. They are dead. Okay. Unfortunately, now, okay, that's a little bit morbid, and I apologize for that. But they are going to have a very difficult time surviving. A lot of companies that I've talked to have said to me confidentially, they said, this pandemic opened Pandora's box. We've let the monkey out of the box, and we weren't ready to let the monkey out of the box. Okay. Organizations we were on a path towards where we got to. The only thing is in about a 2-month period, we drove ourselves about 20 years into the future. Okay. And we weren't ready for 20 years into the future. You take a look at, I do a lot of work and a lot of presentations related to Generation Z and Generation Ys inside organizations. And when you ask the Zs, what are you looking for from your organizations? It's basically something that would be about 10 to 15 years at least into the future. And we are now seeing Zs, the next generation, arguably, in my view, the smartest generation to ever enter our workplaces. Apologies to Generation Y, I know, okay? You guys are very, very smart, okay? I apologize. But the Zs are even smarter, okay? As I like to say, Generation Y considers my generation to be dinosaurs, okay? But Generation Z considers the Ys as dinosaurs, okay? They consider my generation a fossil. Okay, so what we're seeing now is this real movement towards creating organizations that are digitally sound, digitally literate. We're taking and the biggest problem, if I can just say one more thing, the biggest problems are going to be for those organizations where digitalization hasn't caught up yet. For example, I'm working with some companies who are in the production side of things, and they say, we need to have face-to-face workers. It is a necessary part of our business. We need people to run the machines. We need people to go out into the fields and do things. We need people to cook food, for goodness sake. Okay, I wish I could do it remotely, but I can't. These are the organizations that are going to have an even more difficult time finding the right workers to go forward.
I'm back
Thank
again.
you so much.
Sorry for my internet issues when I was introducing this session. We are coming back to the ending of this session, and I'm here to read a question from the audience. And I can see it's a nice question to round up the entire HR Expert Talk. Someone asked, what do you think differentiates companies who manage face-to-face and online workers from those who don't quite know how to do it as successfully?
So what would be the sort of the differentiating feature between those? I think a lot of it is nothing more than experience. Okay, organizations that have had some level of hybrid types of system, or telecommuting, teleconferencing, telework, and so on. They've got a little bit of a leg up. But the nice thing is, because we have learned so much so quickly, there is great benchmarking that's been done. There's been a great ability to understand better how to manage these people. So I think those people that are learning the system, or those organizations that are learning the system, I think the catch-up period is very, very quick. And they will catch up. The question is, the organizations that are already doing it, will they be able to keep up with those that are just starting it? Because those who are just starting it, they're going to learn quickly, and they're going to be able to move much more quickly, because it's a matter of survival. In organizations that don't, they become a little bit more complacent. They think they figured it out. So if anything, I think you're going to see quite a nice evening out of the abilities to manage these types of things.
Thank you. We just received another question. Just give me a second to read it. What challenges do you foresee for production companies and direct workforce?
Oh, you know what? If I had €1 for every question I was asked every time I was asked that question, I'd have €100. Okay. Manufacturing companies are going to have trouble. Okay, and it's not just because of the movement to remote work. It's because the newer generations coming along are less interested in working in those types of environments. They want the digital stuff. I hate to say it, they don't want to get their hands dirty. And there are a lot of jobs in production that require getting your hands dirty. And the question is, how are you going to work with that? I'll give you an example. There's a company in Serbia that I'm in contact with. They have a lot of production work that needs to get done, and they have not been able to find the workers to do it. And this was actually started prior to the pandemic. So you look at unemployment rates and you say, I've got work that needs to get done, but they couldn't find the workers. What did they do? They had to import workers to get it done. They imported workers from outside Serbia to come in for a 2-year process in order to get that work done, because they couldn't find the local staff. I really feel for those people in HR in the production side. We're starting to develop some ideas now on what could be done in order to do that. A lot of it has to do with restructuring and rethinking some of our production processes, trying to find some type of balance between having perhaps some of those jobs that could be blended and some of those jobs that could be hybrid, where you can have a mixed type of opportunity. But I think there's no way for a lot of these production type jobs where we can go into a pure online type of mode or remote work mode. It's going to be hybrid or face-to-face at best.
Thank you, Professor Szamosi, and thank you, Masha. I believe the great takeaways for redesigning workplace and great statistics you brought to this expert talk. Hopefully, the HRs who are listening to this session will now feel encouraged and also knowledgeable on how to tackle such a great challenge. I will close this session by wishing both of you a nice day ahead. Enjoy the rest of the HR week. And for the audience, we are now moving to the next stage, the main stage, for the upcoming panel discussion. Have a nice day.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
You're welcome.